Did he fall from the cliff or was he pushed? And was the occult responsible in any way? Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Kurt McFall. Viewer discretion is advised. Kurt Thomas McFall was born on December 9th, 1966, and he was born in San Diego, California. By the time this case happens, he is 17 years old and he is living now in Northern California in San Francisco. Kurt was described as a really intelligent and super popular kid at the high school he attended. He was heavily involved in the yearbook and also worked on the school's newspaper. He was really good with math and he loved science. There were thoughts that came to him that he may want to join the military after he graduated high school. He was a very confident person, very full of energy, and he at times had a very intense personality. His friends, when talking about him, just always have nothing but amazing things to say. Kurt was also a bit of a nerd. He had recently gotten into the Dungeons and Dragons games. Now, this happens in the 80s, and then, the 80s and 90s was very heavily involved with Satanic Panic. I've talked about Satanic Panic in several videos before on YouTube and TikTok because it has popped up many times for potential motives for crimes or something like that. A year before this case happens, Kurt joins a community that's abbreviated SCA, which stands for Society for Creative Anachronism. The whole thing was about this group of people who would dress up in basically medieval type gear, like a knight in shining armor type things. And they would go to a parking lot and they would have these fake fights with their swords and whatever other weapons that they would bring with them. They practiced jousting and sword fighting. This is something that not just Kurt, but all of them really had a really, really fun time doing. One of the members of SCA would later be interviewed and said that Kurt was there practicing at least twice a week for a while. He was really, really good at doing this jousting and sword fighting. And she said that Kurt was going to be really, really good with the real thing. I guess they do competitions and stuff. Kurt was very involved. He mingled with the group, a lot, and he got along with everyone. There were no signs of anyone hating him or being jealous of him in this group, nothing like that. At least nothing that anyone has said publicly. It was September 8th, 1984. It was a Saturday. Kurt McFall left the home that he shared with his father. Kurt got into his vehicle. He drove across the Bay Bridge to go into San Francisco. He apparently had plans to spend the night at a friend's house, and he was supposed to come home on that Sunday evening, so the next day. However, Kurt did not come home. Kurt was reported missing by his dad pretty much that day, but it wouldn't be long before Kurt was found. And this is where it gets very mysterious. Monday, September 10th, 1984, there are two people who are out bird watching. They are near the Land's End Cliffs, and as they're kind of walking along the shore, they see what looks like someone just sort of maybe laying on the beach. Maybe they're getting a tan or whatever. But the closer they get, they realize this person they're not set up for this type of thing. There's no beach towel, there's no chairs. This person had no shirt on, no shoes, and no socks. They were just wearing their pants. They looked kind of filthy, almost covered in some sand and they weren't moving. Nothing was going on. And on a closer inspection, these two birdwatchers realized that this individual was dead. Police and ambulance arrive, and yes, he is confirmed deceased. And they would soon identify this person as 17-year-old Kurt McFall. Kurt McFall was a very good mountain climber. He was very experienced with it. He was an avid swimmer. I think he competed in swim teams, and he was a diver. He knew the water really well. And so when his dad heard about this, with Kurt being at the bottom of this cliff or possibly washed up in the water, he was just immediately didn't buy it. Like, Kurt knows how to, handle himself around cliffs, and he knows definitely how to swim. He couldn't understand how Kurt got into that situation where he may have fallen. The lifeguard who was there, who kind of approached the scene, said it looked as if Kurt had fallen off the cliff. And then there was someone from the Coast Guard who came to the crime scene, and they too looked at his body and where the cliff was, positioning, and they all basically agreed it looked like Kurt fell off this cliff. Officially, the coroner would say that Kurt McFall died of injuries that are consistent with falling from a cliff. He had a series of abrasions and scratches and whatnot along his entire back. However, there were no other signs of any kind of trauma. There was no stab wounds, no gunshot wounds. There were no indications that he had been punched or anything, at least in the front. There were some bruising on his back. Could have been someone had hit him with something, but it wasn't very clear. Around the same time, at the top of the cliff, but a little bit farther down, this is near like a golf course type place, they find Kurt's vehicle. And it really wasn't very far from where eventually Kurt would be found. There were some concerns about this as well. Around his car were beer bottles. In his car, they found, I think, 1 or 2 beer bottles. They found his driver's license basically just on the floor of the car. According to Kurt's dad, Kurt McFall does not drink at all. But this is a 17-year-old kid, and, maybe back then in the 80s, his dad maybe didn't want to believe that Kurt drank beer without him knowing, but it's not like it's impossible. However, there were a lot of beer bottles around the car to indicate that this wasn't just one person at his car. Also, something the coroner would state is that Kurt McFall, they did a toxicology report. No alcohol, no drugs in his system. Did they test those beer bottles for fingerprints? As far as I know, they did not. Did they dust his car for fingerprints? As far as I know, I don't think they did. Missing from the trunk of Kurt's vehicle was the costume or the gear he had made himself for his SCA competitions. Like the knight's armor that he was always using. It was missing from his trunk. Was this like some kind of weird robbery that they're just specifically stealing that costume? Because there was a $20 bill just chilling right there in the car out in the open that nobody took. The police and the Coast Guard, they were very quick to just say this was an accidental death. Kurt fell off a cliff on accident and he died, and that's it, case closed. Well, not to his dad. His dad was far from being done with it. A couple of things. We'll talk about first the phone call that Kurt's dad received from someone close to Kurt. This phone call said that about a week prior to Kurt's death, Kurt told this friend that Kurt had now become involved in a satanic cult. This cult was performing magic, black magic. And the members of this satanic cult were essentially trying to control Kurt completely. Kurt told this friend on the phone call, "I'm in over my head and I don't know how to get out of this." He told his friend he wanted out, but he didn't know how to do it because maybe he was scared to, I'm not sure. But he did state that he was afraid of some of the members of this cult. Did he name any of them? I'm not sure. There's nothing to indicate that he did. But he likely thought that if he tried to leave this cult, he would probably be killed by them. So Kurt's dad was obviously very kind of like taken aback and surprised by this information. He goes into Kurt's room and he notices some things. He has this like little leather bag and he dumps out the contents, and there are some strange things in it. There was a knife that was made out of a deer's hoof. A deer's hoof? Deer's hoof. A deer hoof. There was this necklace made of stones and feathers. There was also a candle in this bag. There were books of the occult, numerous books of the occult in his room. He found drawings that apparently Kurt did that depicted satanic rituals and other violent type scenes. So Kurt first became very involved with the game Dungeons and Dragons, right? And that's deals with a lot of like medieval type stuff. I think I played Dungeons and Dragons, like the, like where you sit around a table kind of thing. I played that back when I was a teenager. Honestly, kind of fun. I'm not gonna lie. I'm not gonna lie to you. I nerded out when I was a teenager, kind of liked it. But in the 80s and 90s, Dungeons and Dragons would essentially kind of get the blame for a lot of like satanic type things. People are like, oh, they started with Dungeons and Dragons and now they're into satanic occults. Ooh, it's the gateway drug. Like it's ridiculous now to say that, but that was kind of a thought. That was a thing back then. But he went from Dungeons and Dragons to doing essentially cosplaying as medieval knights, doing swordplay and jousting. He was really good at it. He got very involved, but he also became he wanted to know more about the medieval life, medieval culture, I guess, This led to Kurt joining yet another group. This was a group that essentially practiced a pagan religion. Now, Kurt's dad was aware of this. He was aware that Kurt had recently joined this group because a friend had called Kurt's dad and told him how he was concerned about Kurt's involvement in this pagan group. And Kurt was really becoming involved in it, and he was really accepting it into his life. And this would cause him to alienate a bunch of people in his life, mainly his friends. Kurt's, I guess, teacher or instructor in this particular group was a man named Gabriel Carrillo. He would go by this ancient Welsh name, refer to himself as Caradoc or Caradoc. Gabriel had actually met Kurt individually, and when Kurt kind of was talking about how he was really into like the medieval stuff and magic and stuff like that, that's when Caradoc invited Kurt into this group. The friend of Kurt's who told his dad about this group, that friend said he was really concerned because the way he depicted Kurt's involvement in this group was like an addiction. That essentially at first he could do all this stuff and take it in and he would be fine. He would know when to stop or when to like back away. But then he became hooked on it. And then it got to a point where he couldn't leave it. Is this the satanic group that was then later referenced? I'm not sure if maybe the person who said that about Kurt being involved in a satanic cult, if Kurt was referring to this group or if he did something beyond that, because this Caradoc person would say that there was nothing involved with Satanism or satanic cults or anything like that in this group. As a matter of fact, he would say he despised that kind of thing. Is it possible that Kurt branched away from this pagan group and joined a satanic cult? Well, the evidence that was found in his room and the phone call from the friend, it does sound like that's a possibility. However, there is no actual proof of that, and they've never found this potential other group, this satanic group of people. But now there is this belief that Kurt was afraid for his life because he maybe wanted to leave this satanic group, that he had gotten in too deep with all of this and he didn't know how to leave it. And maybe one night he finally said, okay, I'm done. And maybe they killed him for it because they didn't want people knowing about them. And to be fair, he died and without sharing who exactly they were. He only ever told people that there was a group. He didn't name anyone to my knowledge, so it's unknown. Then it was discovered that the friend that Kurt McFall was going to spend the night with that particular evening, the night he would have probably disappeared, was none other than Gabriel Carrillo, aka Caradoc. According to Gabriel, I'm going to call him Gabriel, he said that the two of them planned to go to dinner and watch a movie, and they did that. And then Kurt had gone to go lay down to go to bed, and then Gabriel went to his room and went to bed. Gabriel says that at around 3 o'clock in the morning, Kurt got up and he started knocking on Gabriel's bedroom door saying, "Hey, it's really hot in here. I'm going to go to the beach at 3 o'clock in the morning." And so Kurt left the house, and that was the last time anyone could report seeing Kurt alive. Now, I think there were people who did suspect that Gabriel had something to do with this, but I want to reiterate that there was actually no proof of that. There was no evidence to show that this guy had anything to do with Kurt's death. I don't know how thoroughly they looked into him or how they kind of came to the conclusion that he probably had nothing to do with it, but then that's where, and I want to stress this next part as being rumors and hearsay, and there's no proof of this. But the more you read about this, that whole situation being involved with, Gabriel would lead to the rumors of, was Kurt McFall possibly gay? There were a lot of things here and there, speculation or rumors that Kurt may have been gay. And that led to another possibility, that was Kurt possibly outed, and was he killed by a group of people who gay bashed him, who basically hate crimed him to death by maybe forcing him to walk off the cliff or pushing him off the cliff. That's just sort of out there. It's not obvious. The police haven't really investigated any lead, to be honest with you, but that's something that was not really ever touched on at all. But what we ultimately have is we have a 17-year-old kid who was seemingly happy with life, but also apparently afraid of this mysterious group. He probably wanted to get out of that group, and then he is found dead at the bottom of a cliff. I guess my confusion comes in from, this was at 3 o'clock in the morning, if you believe Gabriel's story. This was around 3 o'clock in the morning. Was the satanic group following him and just got lucky by seeing him leave this place on his own? If Kurt was gay and this was like a gay bashing thing, how did they know? And also, how do they know he would be out at that time of day? That's the problem with this case, is there's just such this blanket of vague information. There's very little concrete proof or evidence of any of it. They have no idea. They can't say with certainty how Kurt got to the bottom of that cliff. They don't know if he did it to himself on purpose, if he accidentally fell, or if he was murdered. The coroner initially said, "I believe this to be a homicide just based on the circumstances." But the police investigated and said, "No, he just accidentally fell off the cliff." To me, I think this was a case that's really hard to investigate, to be fair, that there was so much hearsay about the satanic cult and things they can't prove or have any tangible evidence of. There really wasn't much to look at or find, because no one from that group is going to talk if that group is real. And so what can police do? Kurt's dad firmly believes that Kurt was murdered. And to be honest with you, my gut instinct says I agree with him. My gut instinct tells me that someone pushed him off that cliff. But I don't know who. I have no inkling as to who could have done that. But when seeing his story of who he was, the things he did, how happy he was, it just doesn't make sense that he would just walk so precariously next to a cliff and fall off of it. Especially with no alcohol or drugs in his system. He wasn't drunk, so he wasn't impaired. Who was drinking all those beer bottles around his car? Why didn't they take fingerprints if they didn't? Why didn't they dust for fingerprints in the car? If they didn't, I don't know if they did or not. Did they thoroughly investigate that vehicle? It's vague, I don't know. And that's essentially where this case ends, with I don't know. They don't know. Nobody knows. His death is basically ruled undetermined. They know how he died. They know what physically made him die. They just don't know how he got there. And this is a case where unless somebody comes forward and says, this is what happened, I have proof of this, I don't think they're going to come to a conclusion here, because there's no physical evidence, none. They got nothing. So they have to rely on someone out there coming forward. This is, God, I was born in 85. This is what, 40 years ago? 40 years ago. So if if someone did push them off that cliff, that person's still alive, absolutely. Maybe in their 50s or 60s. Gabriel Carrillo Caradoc passed away on January 1st, 2007. He was 58 years old, and again, there was no proof or anything to indicate he had any involvement in this crime. There's no proof of anyone. Somebody somewhere out there knows the truth, if this was a homicide, and that person might be you. So, if you have information about the death of Kurt McFall, please contact the San Francisco Police Department at 415-553-0123. You can report your information anonymously. You do not have to say who you are. You just have to say what you know. Kurt McFall was a 17-year-old kid with a lot going on. He was having fun with life. He probably had a very bright future ahead of him. But on one night in 1984, he somehow ended up at the bottom of a cliff. And nobody knows how or why. If this was murder, then Kurt McFall deserves justice. So please help him get the justice he rightfully deserves. But that is it for this case, True Crime, a Rooney Dooney Dingleberry Dongs. I hope you found it interesting. And that's it. That's it. That's my talent. That's my talent. This is the talent episode. I'm going to show you my talents to say goodbye. This is one of them. What was that? What was that song? I heard it in my head. Did you hear it? I don't know if I heard it, but you heard it. I heard it. Did you hear it? You heard it. I heard it. My other talent is I can take a Mountain Dew can and I can shove it all the way in my mouth. So. See? Wow. God, I'm good at things in my mouth. Oh, Jesus, Mike, that's a talent, I guess. Where am I going? The talent. Can I go to America's Got Talent with that? Howie Mandel, you out there? You followed me on TikTok, Howie. So, is that a talent? Is that a talent worthy of being on your program and earning $1 million and swallowing a Mountain Dew can? This is so uncomfortable. No, you say goodbye. He's silly. Oh, you did. You're gone. Oh, okay. You were gone a while ago. That's fine. I'm just here talking to myself. Anyway. Hasta la vista, pasta. Fuck. Nope.
It's almost like he's in pain. We're just there. We can't help him. We're just... all we can do is watch him.
Agent Scully, FBI. Wait a minute, that's the lady one. I'm not a lady person. I'm a guy person. Sorry. Agent Mulder, FBI. Shit. God damn it, I dropped it. Anyway, I'm FBI. Is the point. I'm not. But anyway, hi.
Hello, true crimers. This is the story of the Allagash Abductions. Viewer discretion is advised.
What am I doing with my hands? What is this? How's that related to aliens? It's not. It's not. And the voice? I'm sorry. Okay. So I remember seeing this story on Unsolved Mysteries back when I was a kid, and I remember I specifically saw this one for the first time when I was home alone, and I had nightmares for days after seeing this story. I'm a believer in aliens, just like Agent Mulder. I believe there's little green, gray, purple, they can be whatever color they want to, men, women out there floating around in the sky in their little spaceships. I think it's real, absolutely. We can't just sit here and say, oh, it's just us guys. We're the only ones in the entirety of space. We're the only living beings. How stupid is that? If we exist, how come they can't exist? But are alien abductions real? Do you believe in them? What about UFO sightings that have been spotted for decades? Do you believe it? Do you believe that aliens have come to our planet and have just floated around in the sky for whatever reason, I guess, to research us? And they're like, God, Jesus, they're still that way. We'll come back in a couple more decades and see if they're normal. We won't be. How come aliens only ever seem to abduct like hillbillies? Like, what is that? Because that's not the best that humanity can provide, but they always go for them. No offense if you're a hillbilly. I enjoy hillbillies very much. It's just you're not the brightest crayons in the box. You know what I mean? What are aliens getting from them? How to cut up a rabbit and eat it? I don't even know what hillbillies do. How to sleep with their own sisters? I don't know. Anyway, I'm off topic. No, I'm not. This is the topic. But this story is called the Allagash 4, or the Allagash, that's a hard word to say, the Allagash Abductions. And this took place in the Allagash Wilderness Mountains in Maine. And it happened to four friends. It was August of 1976. Twin brothers, Jack and Jim Weiner. Yes, that's their last name. T-he-he. And their chums, their buds, Chuck Rack and Charlie Foltz. Well, they said, guess what? We're going to go on a 2-week-long excursion into the wilderness. We're going to go camping. We're going to hike. We're going to go fishing. We're going to do all the stuff that rugged men are supposed to do out here in the wilderness. And it was going to be a long trip. I don't know about you, but I can't even last one night camping. I need to go home. Because I can't binge watch old episodes of the show 24 in the wilderness. That's just rude. So the four men set out, and they bring along all of their gear, and about 2 nights into this wilderness trip, one of them spots a ball of light just sort of fluttering in the sky above the lake. They said that it was there for about 30 seconds, and then gone. Just poofed into thin air. It just literally zipped out of the sky. Then, a couple of nights later, they go out on their canoe and they go into the lake and they're going to do some night fishing. Once again, they see this big, bright ball of light just appear out of nowhere above the lake. And this time it appears to be much closer than the one they saw the couple of nights prior. Apparently, and by the way, most of the photos I'm showing of images you're seeing of them on the lake or at the campsite, the recreations from Unsolved Mysteries. These aren't actual photos of them. Except for there is a photo I'm showing of the four of them. That one's real, but you'll understand. You'll get it. You'll see it. But one of these men decided to take their flashlight and try to signal SOS with it to this ball of light. And I guess the ball of light appeared to respond in some way. And then all of a sudden, it shot out this big beam of bright light right at them. And then this object appeared to have been now following them. And it was like getting closer and closer. So they say they begin to paddle like crazy, and they're like their paddles and their hands in the water. They're trying to run away from this freaking ball of light that's now chasing them. And they're hoping they could escape it because they don't know what the hell it is. Then they say the next thing they remember is they're just suddenly back on the beach. The canoe is now on the actual beach. And they're kind of just sitting there in a daze, and they look up and they see the ball of light, and it's just hovering there, and then it just begins to back away and it disappears. Now, what it felt like to them was that they made it to the shore within seconds of seeing this ball of light, and nothing happened from it. But what they noticed was, because before they left to go into the canoe, because it's like absolutely pitch dark in this part of the wilderness, they lit a bonfire, a very large bonfire that should have lasted realistically between 3 to 5 hours long. And they when they got back, when they went out to on the lake and they finally paddled back after being chased by the ball of light, they said it only felt like maybe 10, 15, 20 minutes or so, but the bonfire was done. It was completely like fizzled out. And they were like, well, how can that be? We've only been gone for less than an hour. But they didn't really think much of it. And this they said they all began to feel really, really fatigued and tired and kind of sore for whatever reason. And so they just all went to bed. Then they spent the next 6 or 7 days continuing on their wilderness trip, hiking and camping and fishing. And then that was it. They went home. The men would tell their families and their friends, like, hey, we saw this really strange thing, this ball of light. Maybe it was a UFO. We don't really know. And it kind of was just there and it disappeared. And some of their friends and family were like, sure you did, champ. And some of them believed them. Some of them didn't. In 1988, Jack and Jim Weiner, the two of them began to have these very vivid nightmares, very just unsettling nightmares. And at first they were kind of having these dreams separately but never really discussing it. But then one of them started to talk about these nightmares or dreams they're having, and the other brother said, oh my god, I'm having the same ones. These nightmares were of the brothers and their two friends sitting in this big bright white room, sitting on a bench. All four of these men were naked, and Jim and Jack can recall feeling these nightmares, making them feel very fearful, very scared. And they began to wonder to themselves, did something else happen there in the Allagash wilderness? When we were in that canoe, then suddenly back on the beach and the fire was out, how, it should have been lasting 4 to 5 hours or so. How did that happen? Did we lose time? Did something happen? And they believed that the ball of light they saw was a UFO. And so one of the brothers contacted this renowned UFO researcher named Ray Fowler. And at first they just wanted to talk to him to discuss what they saw and if these nightmares meant anything. So after several discussions with Ray Fowler was like, well, why don't we put you guys under hypnosis and we can see if you can recall anything, any kind of buried memories perhaps. And all four men actually agreed to do this hypnosis. They would all do it individually. So the thing is that all four of them were asked not to discuss any of the stuff that they uncovered in their own hypnosis session. And they promised that they wouldn't tell each other what they said. So that way you're not like cross-contaminating stories. They promised to do so, but if they actually did or not, it's not known. So, what you are about to hear, let me say this like Robert Stack would say it. What you are about to hear is the actual... That's not Robert Stack at all. I'm sorry. That was just... Rest in peace, Robert. I didn't mean to butcher your voice. What you're about to hear is some excerpts, Excalibur, X marks the spot, X gonna give it to excerpts. I don't know how to say that word. These are snippets, segments, if you will, of the actual hypnosis session. So what the voices you are hearing are the voices of the four men, each of them recounting their memories from what happened that particular night. These are the things I remember when I was watching this episode as a kid. This audio is what really scared me the most. And even to this day, it's just very unsettling. But here is that audio.
They don't know what to do. I think they think I'm going to come after them. I feel like I want to. I feel like I want to. The first one that comes near me, I'm going to throttle him. That's what I want to do, is throttle him. I don't like these things. I don't care where they come from. They shouldn't be doing this to people. They're right there. Their face is right in my face. I don't know why. I don't want to know. I don't want to know what they want. Oh, they're saying things. They're explaining things with their eyes in my head. They're saying, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. We won't harm you. They say, do what we say. Just do what we say.
I'm afraid that it's like a doctor's office. Ain't it? It's cold like a doctor's office is cold. They put the panel over your chest. And they scrape your arms, your chest, your legs, and thighs. We shouldn't be here. I just keep thinking I want to be back in the canoe.
See some sort of device on him. They've got it looks like a silvery. It looks like it's got curves on it. It's almost like it sucks something. He's got his head tipped way back. It's almost like he's in pain. We're just there. We can't help him. We're just... all we can do is watch him.
So each man, under their own separate hypnosis session, they each recalled a horrifying, terrifying abduction experience and being aboard some kind of alien craft and being experimented on. The thing is that each man would end up recounting virtually the same story. I mean, there were differences between each four based on their points of view, but the overall story was the same. And again, they promised, or they said they would not discuss with each other what they went through with hypnosis before all four of them had gone through it. Whether they did or not, again, I can't say. But if they didn't, the stories with this uncanny kind of similarities, it's pretty alarming. They recounted how they were abducted and how they were probed. These aliens took samples of the men's skin, of their blood. They took various other body fluids. One of them remembers how the aliens' faces were absolutely horrifying. They were like stuff of nightmares. And that now that he remembered them in this hypnosis session, it's like now he can't get it out of his head. But according to them, the aliens communicated in some way saying, don't be afraid of us. Just do what we tell you to do what we say. One of them remembers that this operation room or whatever, it felt like a doctor's office. That one of these group of aliens would take this like panel and scrape it along their chests, I guess to take skin and hair samples. One of them recalls that a device these aliens used was this metal curved type device. And one of the guys saw what was happening to the other guy, and he said it looked like the one going through this particular procedure with this metal thing, looked like he was in a lot of pain and discomfort. Now, all four men also took polygraph tests, and all four of them passed those polygraph tests with flying colors. Again, take it with a grain of salt because lie detectors aren't always the most accurate thing. But they were asked, did you guys speak to one another about your stories ahead of time? Did you guys concoct this story? They asked some questions like that in the polygraph, and they all were telling the truth. I guess there is a Dr. William Cole who was a well-known skeptic of this type of thing, at least back then. He would say that the story that these four men was giving was just a bunch of science fiction. It was hocus pocus. It wasn't real. That what they were explaining through their hypnosis is that they were just recalling scenes they had seen from like alien movies, because movies from like the 50s and 60s with alien abduction and aliens traveling to Earth and all that they were giving descriptions in these hypnosis sessions that sounded very similar to scenes in these movies. Not to mention that there were several books that you could read about alien abductions back then, and that's likely where they got these stories from. However, for the longest time, all four men said what we experienced is what we experienced. It's all true. We didn't lie. This was real. We swear up and down this happened to us. So in 2016, there was, I guess, an interview done to one of these men, Chuck Rack. And he said in this interview in 2016 that the entire thing was a hoax. That he just went along with this story because of financial reasons. It's like he was, earning money off of this. However, he is the only one, as far as I can tell, who has ever come forward to say that it was a hoax or that they faked it. Admittedly, I have not read the book on this case because I think it was Dr. Fowler, who wrote a book called The Allagash Abductions with regards to his experience with the 4 men. So in this book, from what I understand, there is some detail that Chuck Rack was the only one of the 4 men who had issues with the hypnosis sessions. As in, he didn't take to it as well. He wasn't able to recall much information at all from what the experience was. And that the other 3 men were able to be hypnotized really easily, very quickly, and they were able to recall a lot of information, whereas Chuck Rack just wasn't able to. He did not respond super well to the hypnosis. And according to the book, Chuck Rack was disappointed by his inability to go deep under to remember more information. He was upset, and this is something I guess he struggled with for some time. And Chuck Rack also had read books about alien abductions and fictional stories about aliens and whatnot, and he said he received the most pressure from people with regards to coming from the skeptics. He received the most pressure, and I think it's because people found out that he had read books about this type of stuff. And he was being accused more directly about faking these stories than the other 3. So in 2016, when he came out that interviewed and said, this was a hoax, there is a possibility he may have just been saying that just to distance himself from the story altogether, and just so he's not being scrutinized anymore. But like I said, the other 3 men reportedly have never come forward to state that this was fake. As far as I can tell, those 3 men still stand by their story and say this is what actually happened. The truth of the matter is we'll never really know unless all 4 of them come out and say, all right, we did plan this. We wrote this whole thing up. This was all fake. But what would the reasons be? How would they even start coming up with the story? Hey, let's go out to the Allagash and then, let's just pretend we got abducted by aliens. One thing to note, though, is that Chuck Rack, even though he did say that the abduction part was fake, he did say that all 4 of them did see some very strange balls of light in the sky over the Allagash. He said that was not a lie. He said that was absolutely true. What they saw was real. So that's another thing to give, okay, well then maybe they were abducted. I don't know. I've just always been fascinated by stories like this because there's always that mystery behind it. We're never going to really know the truth. And honestly, I don't want to. I like these stories just as they are. I don't want to find out that they're fake. I don't even want to find out necessarily that they're true. I just think they're really interesting stories. They're entertaining at the very least. But if it was real, obviously it's horrible what they went through. Again, I believe in this stuff. You may not. So you may think the whole thing is just a big haha joke. And that's fine. But I don't know. I believe in aliens. I always have a hard time with the abduction part. Why are they abducting us? What do they want to know from us? What are we going to give them? But what do you guys believe? Do you think that the Allagash 4 were being legitimate? That they were telling a truthful story? Were they abducted? Or were they lying through their teeth just to get some money? And why were they lying? What was the point? But at the very least, just a very interesting story. So if you ever find yourself out in the Allagash wilderness on a canoe in the middle of a lake, look up. You might see a ball of light who will suck you up into their ship and put metal things up your buttholes. For whatever reason, I never understood the probing. I just don't get it. Some people like it. Some people don't. Some people love it. You know what I mean? Not me. Anyway, that is it for this video. True crime, true alieners, true abductors. I don't even know what you guys would be called in this one. That's it. That's the video, okay? Anyway, just have fun. Have a great day. Or night, or morning, whatever time it is for you. And don't get abducted by aliens. And if you do, if you get probed, you might like it. You might like it. You never know until you try. You know what I mean? You know what I mean. Okay. No, take that back. Sorry, that was creepy. A family is found slain inside their home. There are multiple suspects, but are any of them the actual killer? Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of the Stipps Hill Massacre. Viewer discretion is advised. At approximately 12 p.m. on September 25th, 2011, in Laurel, Indiana, a young girl who's about 2 years old is found walking alone down a stretch of desolate road. There are no adults around her, and so one of the vehicles that's passing by stops and asks the little girl if she's okay, where's your mommy and daddy? The little girl says to this person, my mommy is dead. They shot my family. She says, Grandma and Grandpa were killed too. So this passerby rushes the girl to the police, and the police managed to go back to the home where the little girl lived. Thankfully she knew where her house was. And so when police arrive, they don't see anything out of the ordinary around this house. It's actually a trailer on this large property. The property is located down this very long road called Stipps Hill Road, and it leads to this big open kind of like farmland that has a trailer, it has a farmhouse. It's a large property that's not really surrounded by much of anything else. So when the police peer inside the window of the trailer, they see some blood on the window, and then they see what they think might be a body on the ground, but it's very hard to tell because the blinds are pretty much closed. So this being a super small town, like very small town in Laurel, it's like literally 500 people who live there. Police decide before they enter the home, because they knock on the door, the windows, they don't hear anything or anyone, they call homicide detectives to basically meet them there, because presumably there's dead bodies inside, based on what the little girl said, based on what they can see, and they're not hearing anything or anyone respond. So homicide detectives arrive, and basically, right as they're arriving, there is, they hear the sounds of a truck basically pulling up behind the trailer, and they know it's not another police officer. So they go around with kind of their guns drawn because they don't know what's going on here, and they see a man get out of this truck. And the man sees the police, and he immediately begins to run. He flees. And this is like near a really heavily wooded, very densely wooded area. And so he manages to basically escape the police, because it appears that he really knew this brush in this area really well, and the police just didn't. And he managed to get away, but he left his truck behind. Police look at the license plate on the truck, and they're able to pull it up in their vehicle, and they find out that the truck is registered to a man named Dustin Lane. So they send some officers to see if they can find Dustin at his home, if they can maybe where he went. Meanwhile, back at the trailer, homicide detectives have finally entered the trailer. When they get inside, their worst fears come to life. There isn't just one body, there are four. 4 people who appear to have been shot dead, as well as possibly beaten. They are quickly able to ascertain who the 4 people are, and they are the Napier family. Roy and Angie Napier, who were a couple going through kind of a rough patch, who were technically separated at the time, and then 2 of their children were also shot dead. 18-year-old Jake and 23-year-old Melissa. Melissa was the mother of the 2-year-old girl, Ashley, who was found walking alone on the road. Roy and Angie met when they were actually kids. They were lifelong friends. They went to school together, and eventually they would fall in love and they would get married. And then they went on to have 3 kids. First, they had Josh, then they had Melissa, and then next and finally they had Jake. This is, like I said, a very small community, so everyone basically knew the Napier family, and everyone said that, Roy and Angie were always very good parents to the kids. The family had their share of issues, normal issues that every family goes through, basically, or most. But they always seemed like a really decent family, didn't really get into any kind of trouble, didn't ruffle any feathers, they just sort of were there. Roy was described as basically a really quiet guy. He kind of kept to himself for the most part. He wasn't super outspoken. He never really called much attention to himself. Roy was someone who basically worked nearly every day. He did drywalling for work, and he did that so that he could make sure he's providing for his family. And even with that, he still wasn't making like a ton of money, so the family was always kind of just barely making it by. This would cause Roy and Angie to get into a lot of arguments. Their relationship began to become strained, and eventually they would be offered to live in a trailer on the property that Roy's mom owned. She owns this large property on Stipps Hill Road. So for a time, everything was going okay, but then the money struggles came back when Roy got injured at work. He repeatedly injured his back, and at one point it just got too bad that he could no longer work. He had to go on to disability, and he was on a lot of pain meds. So this caused more of a strain in Angie and Roy's relationship, and eventually Angie decided she was going to be moving out. And so basically the two of them separated without actually getting a divorce or anything like that. But even with all this like family, struggles going on, they still didn't like make any enemies in the community. They didn't make any waves. The rumor mill immediately kicked in because, again, small community. Everyone knew about these murders within like an hour or two of the bodies being discovered. Everybody wondered, like, what the hell? Like, who on earth would do this to this family? Because they're such a normal, typical family for the most part, and no one knew why they would all be brutally killed this way. At the crime scene, it is very obvious that they were also robbed. All of Roy's pill bottles that typically contained Oxycontin were completely empty. So the pill bottles were still there, but none of the pills were. They were all gone. They also noticed that all of their pockets had been turned out. Their wallets were taken out and rummaged through, purses rummaged through. They couldn't find any of their cell phones at first, so they assumed all of the cell phones were also stolen. Now, this is all happening, by the way, within like minutes. So while they're investigating inside, police notice there is a blood trail in the grass outside the trailer. And they start to follow that blood trail, and it gets kind of into more of like a side area that they couldn't really see just from walking up to the property. When they get to the end of that blood trail, there is a fifth body. It was a man who had appeared to be shot numerous times. They managed to find his wallet in his pocket, and nothing was stolen from him, it appeared. His ID was in there, and he was identified as a man named Henry Smith. A few feet away from his body, kind of in some bushes, they discover a cell phone. It looks like a pretty clean cell phone, they say. It doesn't appear to have any damage to it, and it's powered off and it won't come on, so the battery is dead. So they collect it, and eventually they'll look up some information on it. They don't know if it belongs to Henry, though. They also don't know how is Henry Smith connected to the Napier family. So back in the house, when they're searching for evidence, they do find several .38 caliber, casings there, or shells. So they collect all of those, and they also take out, there's also bullets found inside the bodies that they take out. They also find a shoe print that's made in blood. So someone had walked through blood and left the shoe print. They were able to identify the shoe as a DC sneaker. No one in the house, none of the bodies had those shoes. They also did not find any shoes like that in the house anywhere. Henry Smith, his shoes were not the ones that left the impression. So as they're investigating, detectives are paged and say, hey, please come down to this roadblock because there's someone here who wants to talk to you guys. It's Dustin Lane, the guy who tried to run away from them earlier, who parked his truck. When detectives arrive, Dustin appears to have cuts and abrasions all over his body. And they're like, that's kind of interesting. How did you get those, bud? And he's like, well, I was running through the trees and the bushes and everything trying to get away from you guys. And so that's how I cut myself, because the cuts were pretty fresh. And so they're like, okay, why did you run from us then? He said he didn't know that there were bodies inside that trailer when he arrived. He ran from police because I guess he has a history with the law, a criminal history. And so he thought that, I don't know why, but he said, I was nervous and so I ran because I saw police there. I thought maybe they would arrest me for something. When he kind of ran away, he found out through the grapevine that there were bodies found in the Napier trailer. And so that's when he decided to go back and say, whoa, okay, I didn't know they were in there. And that's, I'm coming forward to say I didn't have anything to do with that. I ran for other reasons. And for the most part, they actually kind of believed him because he did willingly on his own come back to police after running away from them. Most guilty people probably wouldn't do that. So they ask him some more questions, and kind of like, I guess he's like a friend of theirs. And so they, at that point, they're like, okay, well, we don't have really any evidence to connect it to this yet. They're keeping him on their list of suspects, but they let him go for the time being. When detectives get back to the trailer, they do some more searching, and they find something interesting: a restraining order. And you would think at first, like, okay, it's a restraining order about Roy and Angie, right? No. It's actually a restraining order that Roy took out against his son, Josh. Josh, who was the only person of that family not in the trailer. So Roy's mom, whose property, this is all belongs to, she's there. So they're asking her, like, what's the situation with Roy and Josh? And she tells them that they have been getting into some arguments lately. She said that Roy said it was about the fact that Josh wanted to like take over the family and take care of everything because Roy was hurt and couldn't do anything. And apparently that led to arguments between Roy and Josh. And so Roy had kicked Josh out of the house a week before the murders. And to police, that's like, okay, that could be a reason. That could be a motive right there. They find out that Josh moved in with a girlfriend, and they get that address. While they're talking to the mom, they also ask her, like, who's this Henry Smith guy? Because we found him too. What's his connection to the family? She says, oh, Henry's a good friend of the family's. He's like I guess a neighbor who lives down the road. And she said that he was always going over to, the property, talking to Roy. They were very friendly with each other. They always just kind of talked and stuff like that. And so they kind of just assumed that Henry may have just been in the wrong place at the wrong time. But she says that Henry was never a troublesome person. He never showed any signs of violence, and never anything that would indicate why maybe he may have been a victim in all of this. So they were kind of at a loss. So police go to the girlfriend's house of Josh, and they knock on the door. Nobody answers. No one's home. And so at that point, they put out an APB for Josh Napier because he may be a suspect in this, or for all they know, he could be a victim as well. His body may show up somewhere. They don't know. Several hours later, as these detectives are back at the crime scene, going through some things, who shows up? Josh. Josh shows up in an absolute panic. He's like, what happened? What on earth is happening here? I just found out from my cousin that my family was killed. Like, he does seem very distraught. He seems legitimately upset. His emotions seem real. And so they kind of take Josh aside and begin to ask him some questions. He did say that his relationship with his dad had definitely been strained recently in the past, especially the past couple of months, that they were getting into a lot of arguments about, just sort of like the family, that kind of thing. And, led to a lot of kind of potentially almost violent arguments. But he had absolutely no idea that Roy took out a restraining order against him because the restraining order wasn't actually filed yet. So Josh had no idea. And Josh was like, I don't know why he would do that because I never threatened them or anything like that. He then also tells them that his parents, Roy and Angie, were going through a very tense time. Like I said earlier, they were separated. And Angie had moved out sometime prior to all of this happening. She moved in with a new boyfriend. His name was Jim Belson. Well, Josh is telling police that Jim and Roy did not get along. They did not like each other whatsoever. Apparently, Jim had told Angie, don't ever go to that trailer. Don't ever go there. He seemed to be kind of controlling a little bit. Oh, that's how Josh perceived it. Just because Jim didn't like Roy, didn't want her around all of that. So at this point, they have three suspects. They have that Dustin gentleman from earlier. They have Josh, the son. And now they have a boyfriend, Jim. Police asked Josh, where were you during this time frame? And they determined the time frame the murders would have likely happened. Josh said, I was at my girlfriend's the entire time. Not the strongest alibi, but it is an alibi. Just as they're about to let him kind of go, they look down and notice Josh is wearing a pair of DC sneakers. The exact same sneaker that would have left the impression in blood in the crime scene. So police are like, we're going to need to take your shoes. And so he's like, okay, and they do. His shoes are completely clean when they take them. There's no sign of blood on the bottoms or anywhere. Police are then informed about the cell phone they found near one of the bodies that they thought belonged to Henry Smith. Turns out that phone wasn't Henry's, it was actually Angie's. For some reason, the phone had been basically erased. The SIM card was erased. All of the text messages were deleted. There were only like a few contacts in there, and one of those contacts was for Melissa's phone number. And so they couldn't find Melissa's cell phone, but now they had her number, so they gave that to their e-crime division to see if they can ping where that cell phone may have gone. And so that takes some time. Next, the detectives interview the only witness they think they have to this murder, and a 2-year-old girl named Ashley, Melissa's daughter. Ashley doesn't say much because she's 2, but she did say something very incriminating. She told police Jim did it. And they're like, okay, well, let's go to Jim. So they get to Jim Belson's house. They tell him about the murders, and he also seems very genuinely surprised, very genuinely upset, at least about Angie being killed. Like, again, his emotions seem very real. He does very upfront with police. He says, yeah, I hated Roy, and Roy hated me. We hated each other very much. Jim confirms, yeah, I did not want Angie going there. I did not want her being around him. And then he tells him the reason why. Roy, unbeknownst to a lot of people outside the family, Roy was dealing. He was dealing his pain medications to people, his Oxycontin. And so in Jim's mind, that created a possibility or a potential for violence at this house. And that's why he did not want Angie over there, because, drug dealing can lead to something worse. He said he had absolutely nothing to do with the murders. He said he would never, ever hurt Angie. He did not have a criminal history whatsoever, had no brushes with the law. He said he had an alibi. They gave him the, where were you during this time? He said, I was at a barbecue for quite some time. Police right then and there call several of the people that Jim would have been around, and they all confirmed that he was at the barbecue. So at that point, Jim is still on their suspect list, but they move him down. When police get a call from the crime lab, they find out that the DC sneakers that Josh Napier was wearing was not the shoes to leave the impression in blood at the crime scene. There were no traces of blood at all, even cleaned, on those shoes. And the impression did not match the exact same bottom of the shoe. That being said, they still brought Josh back in for questioning because they determined that he was likely lying to them about the reasons why he and Roy were in a heated, battle, I guess. They think it has to do with the drugs being dealt. And that's when Josh says, okay, yeah, me and my dad were at odds because he was dealing his drugs. He said this caused a rift. This caused them to argue a lot. Sometimes the arguments got a little bit violent, nothing too extreme, but that's probably why Roy took out the restraining order. He didn't want Josh to interrupt this thing he had going on. But is that a reason for Josh to kill Roy and also his family, his mom, 2 of his siblings? Traumatize, this 2-year-old girl because she was in the house when it happened? Is that really a motive for all of that? Police ask him if they know anything about people that maybe Roy had done this dealing to. He said he didn't really know most of them, but there was one person in particular he remembers driving Roy to this person's house. He didn't know the guy's name, who he actually dealt to, but he knew that the guy lived at this house with his mom, and that his mom was referred to as someone named Blondie. So Josh gets in a car with them and he takes them to the house, and they are able to pull up the information on the house, and they learn that Blondie is obviously a nickname for a woman named Marina Richardson. They confirm that her son lives there in the house with her. His name is David Eisen. Well, David Eisen is actually known by police fairly recently. You see, sometime very shortly before this, David had broken into a drugstore. He caused a lot of damage. He knocked a bunch of things over. He broke some glass. and he accosted the pharmacist, and his goal there was to steal drugs, prescription drugs. During all of this, he ended up cutting himself on some glass, and he left some blood behind. Now, David Eisen is a convicted felon. He had at least 15 prior felonies, which means his blood, his DNA, was already in the system. So when they ran the blood from the crime scene at the drugstore, they matched it to him. Now police learn he has a connection to Roy Napier, a guy who was selling prescription drugs illegally. Guy tries to steal prescription drugs, so it kind of makes sense at this point. I guess it took some time, but they were able to find out where Melissa's cell phone had pinged last. And they found out it had pinged about 4 to 6 hours after the murders would have taken place. And it pinged at a address. They drove to that address. Lo and behold, it's the house where David Eisen lives. As a matter of fact, when police got to that house to confirm, they looked up and they could see the actual cell phone tower literally basically right behind David's house. So I think it's like several months later now, because they're trying to build a case against David. You know, they're trying to just basically link the cell phone and do all this before they can formally actually arrest him. So during this, they're staking out his house. And one day they notice that a man leaves David's house in this big beard, and there's a woman leaving with him. And so they get into the car and they take off. At this point, they're like, all right, we gotta go after him. We gotta get him. So they basically follow this vehicle. They manage to stop it. They pull it over, and a man gets out of the car in a very, very obvious disguise. There is this big, just ridiculous beard with these glasses and this mustache. They can see the string from the beard being wrapped around the dude's ear. It is painfully obvious this is a disguise. And they look at him like, "Are you David Eisen?" And he's like, No. I'm Tim Eisen. It's not me." And then basically they have him remove the obvious disguise, and they can tell, "No, this David, we know it's you." They asked him, "Why are you wearing this insane disguise? It's not even close to being a good disguise." He said, "Well, there's a murderer on the loose. There's this guy who killed a whole family. I put on a disguise because I didn't want them to find me." What? In his trunk, they find an AK-47, and it's loaded. And they find a loaded .380 handgun. At David Eisen's house, after they get a warrant, they find a pair of DC sneakers. These sneakers did have some brownish kind of rust colors on them, which is indicative of very old or dried blood. They were sitting on top of a washing machine, so it looked like they had attempted to wash these shoes. When the crime lab gets them, they test those brown stains, and it is blood. I don't think it's enough to confirm that it's one of the victim's blood, but they confirm it's human blood. And then they also take the bottom of the shoe and they match it to the impression left behind, and it is the exact shoe that left that bloody impression. So with all this evidence, David Eisen just flat out confesses to it. And he would end up pleading guilty to 5 counts of murder. So what happened? Well, he said that at the time he was very addicted to Oxy, and he typically would steal prescription medications, which he would also confess to the robbery at the drugstore, which he was caught on CCTV as well. There are images of him doing all of this. But he said he did that, and then sometimes when he was desperate, he would buy from people. And so that's how he kind of made a connection with Roy, because he found out through the grapevine that Roy was dealing Oxy. So on that fateful day, when he got to the trailer, he was driven there, and he went there with the intent of buying some Oxy off of him. He said Roy was there, and his two of his kids were there. His wife was there visiting. She was just there visiting, her 2 other children and her granddaughter. But Roy told David, "Hey, I'm upping the price of the pills. I'm going to be charging $1 extra for each pill." David was like, "No, that's not what we agreed on last time." And he said, "Well, that was last time," Roy said. "This time, I'm charging more." David didn't like that. He got very angry. And so he just said he just decided at that point that he wasn't going to pay those prices, but he wanted those pills. So he said, all right, I'm just going to kill them. Literally. And he just took out his gun and he shot Roy point blank in the head. And then he just quickly shot everyone else in the trailer. Just killed them all dead. He then admits to rummaging through their pockets, taking any cash he can find. He steals all of the pills that he finds in the house, all of the oxy. And then as he's about to leave, he sees Henry Smith come up on the trailer. Henry looks in and sees the carnage. And then that's when David notices him. And so Henry begins to run. David chases him and fires several rounds into him, killing him because now he's a witness. David steals all the cell phones that he could find. He accidentally said he drops one of them, which turned out to be Angie's. And I don't really know what he did with the other cell phones. He might have sold them for money. Apparently, when he was doing this confession, he was extremely calm. He was cool, collected, almost eerie, very creepily. He just was like, yeah, I did it. I just decided to shoot and kill all of them. He also accused his girlfriend, Amanda Napier, of driving him to the house. He also says she was the one to set up this drug deal because he didn't like texting. So she did all the texting. She set it up. She did the drive to the house. She was in the car when he killed everyone. She drove him to the drugstore that one time when he robbed it. So she was also the woman that was there when David was caught with the crazy disguise. So she would end up being charged with relations to robbery and the whole drug dealing fiasco, but she was not charged with any connections to the physical murders themselves. They had no evidence to say she had any knowledge of it, that it was going to happen. By the way, her last name is Napier, but unbelievably, even in this very small town, she has absolutely no relation to the Napiers who were killed. David Eisen, because he would plead guilty to all 5 counts of murder, was sentenced to 5 life sentences without the possibility of parole. He has tried to appeal convictions, but I mean, he confessed, and so his appeals have essentially been denied. I think he won one appeal for something about sentencing, but ultimately he still got the 5 life sentences and doesn't get parole. So 5 people shot dead because a man wanted Oxycontin, because a man was addicted to it and he didn't want to pay $1 extra for it, for each pill. People kill for the absolute most insane reasons. And what's most kind of tragic of all is that this 2-year-old girl witnessed all of this happening and she managed to get away. Hopefully she doesn't have a lot of memories about what happened that day because of her age, but you know, it's still something extremely traumatizing to have to deal with, to see her entire family be gunned down. But at least the Napier family was able to get their justice. But that is it for this case, True Crime Maroonies. I hope you found it interesting. As usual, if you have tripped, fallen, and stumbled your way into this video, hello, I'm Mike. I tell true crime stories here and over on TikTok. So please subscribe here, follow me over there. The link is in the link tree in the description below. Next, if there's a case you want me to cover, please email me. The email is listed below. Just email me the name of the person, where it happened, when it happened, and I will add it to my list. I pick my cases at random. I'll cover that case eventually. I just can't tell you when. Next, if you want to support me in any way, we sell merch. We sell t-shirts and hoodies and stuff like that, and we ship all over the entire world. That's also in the link tree in the description of this video below. Lastly, if you have a Discord account and you want to join my Discord server, also linked in the link tree, please be over the age of 18 or else you will be given the old swift kick in the butt out of there. Sorry, not sorry. But that is it for this video, True Crime Maroonies. So until the next video, I will see you for the next one. What? Molly, girl, you crazy. Oh, fine, come here. You're over there throwing a hissy fit. Big temper tantrum. Come on. She's just cussing at you guys like she always does. You're very rude. You're a rude girl. But you're adorable when you're rude. Anyway. Bye. Right? Right? Oh my God, you're so foul.